You woke up in Skarnhavn. A low groan of wind slid through the wooden beams of your house. You could hear the sea gnawing at the rocks below the cliffside, restless in its hunger. The hearth had died down to red coals, and above it, the iron tools you'd been shaping the night before still hung warm in your dreams. You did not remember falling asleep. You rarely did. Your name is Avar, though few speak it often. Most just call you the smith's boy, even though old Halric, the man who raised you, died last spring, coughing blood into his beard. You now ran the forge yourself, though the villagers only came when they needed horseshoes or repairs to nets, never for weapons. The hammer was never yours. That was always made clear. But you had dreams. Dreams where the hammer glowed white hot, and the blade you shaped in the dark shed light into places that should never be lit. This morning was wrong. The birds did not sing. The frost came in strange patterns across the glass. The sea sounded hollow. And in your stomach, something shifted, as if something ancient in your blood stirred with unease. There was a knock at your door, 3 quick raps, then silence. No one knocked in Skarnhavn. You opened the door and found Brynja standing there, taller than most men, her black braid roped over her shoulder, eyes like hard amber. She wore the old armor of the shield maidens, half rusted and scar-scored, and her furs were soaked through with sleet. "Get your cloak," she said. "There's something you need to see." You hesitated. Brynja had been gone for years. 10 at least, cast out by the Jarl after the last failed raid. She was supposed to be dead. You remembered the way she'd argued with Halric once in the forge, back when you were small. She had looked at you strangely, not like a child, but a riddle. Now she looked the same, only colder. You followed. The sky above Skarnhavn was choked with low clouds. Snow had not fallen, but the wind stung the skin, and the smell of salt and pine was heavy in the air. The village was quiet. Too quiet, as if all sound had been swallowed. As you passed the longhouse, you saw the men gathered outside, all facing the same direction. Warriors, fishermen, even old Asmund the goat herder. No one spoke, eyes wide, jaws tight. Children clung to mothers in doorways. They were looking at the fjord. There, in the shallows just beyond the stone pier, a boat drifted silently. It was not one of Skarnhavn's. No sail, no oars, just one long ship, dark as pitch, moving against the tide without wind, and aboard it, motionless figures, standing. You counted 9, then you looked again. No one stood. They were corpses. Jarl Edric arrived with his men, shouting orders to stay back. He barked for torches, for spears, for anything that could burn. But none of the warriors moved. It was Yrsa, the seeress, who stepped forward, thin as bone, with feathers in her hair and dried blood on her palms. She walked to the water, whispering. The boat bumped the shore. And then the corpses opened their eyes. They did not attack, they simply stared. Their skin was pale, bluish with rot, but their eyes were white, not blind, but hollow, too knowing. Each one bore a mark on its brow, a rune you did not recognize, all except the last. The last stood at the prow, not rotting at all, cloaked in black wool, face covered in a pale mask of carved bone. He raised his hand and pointed at you. The others turned, and in your chest, the rune-stone pendant you had worn since you could remember, the one they had found with you in the ashes, burned against your skin. Brynja stepped in front of you. "Go back to your forge," she said. "Now." But you didn't, because the moment the masked man pointed, Varg, the mad thrall with the burned face and empty eyes, began to scream. "Sverrin returns!" he howled. "The price is unpaid! The child must choose!" No one understood him, except you, because you knew the name he spoke. You had heard it in your dreams. and it was your true name. You did not run, even though the eyes of the dead fixed upon you, even though Varg's scream split the frozen air like a blade, even though Brynja shoved you behind her and reached for the axe at her back. Still you stood there, heart pounding, lungs refusing to breathe, skin seared by the burning rune pressed against your chest beneath the tunic. Because when Varg shouted that name, Sverrin, it echoed in your bones. It was not a name anyone in Skarnhavn had ever spoken aloud, but you had whispered it in sleep, in dreams, in silence. The cloaked man at the prow of the dead ship did not move again. His arm lowered slowly, his head tilted to the side as if examining prey not worth chasing. Then he stepped backward, vanishing into the dark hull of the boat. A moment later, the corpses, 8 in number, collapsed all at once as if their strings had been cut. No breath, no twitch, just lifeless again. The boat remained, unmoved, unclaimed. The Jarl gave the order to burn it, but when the torches were thrown, the flames would not catch. Later that night, the village met in the longhouse. The council fire was stoked high, though the chill in the air remained. You sat at the edge of the gathering beside Brynja, who hadn't said a word since the encounter. She had watched the flames like they could answer a question only she knew how to ask. Jarl Edric stood before the seated warriors, the elders, the hearthkeepers, and the seeress Yrsa. His voice was gravel. His one eye burned beneath the scarred brow like a dying coal. What we saw, he said, was a message and a curse. No one disagreed. He turned to Yrsa. What does it mean? She looked at you. It means the bargain is broken. The room stiffened. You didn't understand. What bargain? You asked. The silence was long. Then Varg laughed softly. Not madness this time, something else. Pity. The Jarl finally spoke. 15 winters ago, he said, a warship came from the northern reach. Not from Midgard, not from men. It came from the realm beyond the ice, and it demanded blood. He looked at you then, but not as a man looks at a child. He looked at you as if you were a relic unearthed, something dangerous, something once buried. You were found after it, he said. The same night, the flames swallowed the fjord. The same night, the stars vanished and never returned. Yrsa added, he was not born, he was spared. That night, you went back to your forge and locked the door. Brynja came with you. She didn't ask. She just followed, took the hammer off the wall and began to polish it. You said nothing. There was nothing to say. After some time, she spoke. Do you want the truth? You nodded. She looked at the iron disc you had kept around your neck all your life, the one shaped like a coin, but too thick, too cold, too alive in your hand, the one with the etched rune no one could read. I've seen that mark before, she said. You looked up sharply. Where? In the barrow of the horse-eaters. You stared. That barrow had been forbidden since before you were born. Brynja continued. There's a story the Skalds don't sing, about the king in the mask, about Sverrin, not a name, but a curse, a title given to the last child of the old blood before the world was bound by gods. She looked at you then with something like sorrow. You weren't just spared, Avar, you were hidden, because you're the last of them. You demanded to know more. Brynja hesitated, then gave you a tale. Before Odin was one-eyed, before Thor bore his hammer, there were others, forgotten kings born from frost and fire. The first men, the deep blood, they carved the land with song and bound the skies with steel. But their pride was great, so the gods sent the veil, the barrier between realms, and the deep blood was sealed. But they left a promise behind, she whispered. One would return, carrying the mark, carrying the key. Your hand went to the disc again. The forge whispered. The next day, the villagers found the masked man, or rather, what was left of him. His body was discovered at the edge of the frostwood, suspended in the trees by rune-carved iron chains. His mask lay on the ground beneath, split in two. Beneath it, there was no face, only blackened bone and eyes still staring. No one claimed him. No one spoke the rites. The Jarl ordered the remains burned, but when the pyre was lit, the smoke went downward, into the earth. Yrsa wept. That night, you dreamed. You stood on a battlefield of snow. Corpses lay in neat rows, each with your face. The sky churned with red clouds. A horn sounded in the distance, low, mournful. Then the ground cracked beneath you, and from the fissure rose a throne of antlers and ash. Upon it sat a man in iron robes, maskless but eyeless, only hollows filled with flame. He spoke a word, it shattered your ears, and when you awoke, the runestone around your neck was gone. Brynja found you by the forge, kneeling, blood running from your nose. "Did you dream of him?" she asked. You nodded. She swallowed hard. "Then we have no time." Later that morning, as the sky turned grey with snow, a second ship arrived. This one bore a flag, black with a silver wolf head, the banner of Jarl Thorold of Winterheim. Edric did not expect him. When Thorold stepped ashore, he brought with him 20 men and a letter sealed in wax. He came not as friend, but as heir. "I come to claim what was promised," he said, tossing a bag at Edric's feet. Inside, a severed hand wearing Edric's old signet ring. Thorold claimed the right of oathblood, an ancient custom allowing vengeance for betrayal between jarls bound in battle. He accused Edric of breaking a blood pact sealed long ago. That pact, he said, was sworn in fire, blood, and a child. He had come to collect you. The villagers were divided. Some muttered that Edric had lost the gods' favor. Others whispered that perhaps giving you up would end the curse, that one life weighed less than all. Edric refused. Thorold promised war. That night, as the snow fell heavy and the air smelled of rot, Brynja made a decision. "We leave tonight," she said. "You and I. We find the truth. The seeress cannot help us here." You asked her why she helped you. She looked away. "Because your father was my brother. You left Skarnhaven under cover of darkness, through the cliffs, past the barrows, across the stone causeway that led to the old forest. Only Varg followed. He did not ask. He simply walked behind you barefoot in the snow, muttering. The last thing you saw turning back toward the village was the longhouse aflame, and above it, in the smoke, the pale face of the masked man, whole once more, watching. The barrow stood like a black tooth against the white spine of the hills, hunched beneath the pines. Snow swirled around it, but did not rest atop. The old folk said it had been here since before the sea drank the sky, that the horse-eaters, a tribe of half-men who had worshipped beasts and burned their dead with bridles in their mouths, were buried upright in stone chairs, facing north so their rage would never sleep. The place was forbidden. But Brynja walked toward it without fear. You followed. Varg limped behind, muttering broken things to the wind. You reached the entrance near dusk. There was no door. Only a narrow crevice split into the earth, framed by two leaning stones carved with ancient spiral runes, the kind that made your skin crawl. Not the clean, elegant script of the newer staves, but jagged things, like antlers drawn by a blind hand. Brynja handed you a torch. "You'll need this," she said. "It's not the dead we fear in barrows, it's what they remember." You lit it. The flame flickered strangely, green at the edges, and you stepped inside. The air within was colder than outside. The torch struggled, the smoke crawling down instead of up. The walls were rough, uneven, not dug by hands but gnawed open. Bones littered the floor, old and new, human and not. You heard whispers, no, not whispers, clinks, as of rains. then the rattle of hooves, underground. Varg pressed close to the stone, whispering, "The riders still chew their bits, even in death." You tried to ignore him. The path forked. Brynja led left. You descended a ramp of rough-hewn steps. The air turned sour, rich with iron and damp fur. And then the corridor opened into a vast chamber, circular, domed, supported by black pillars carved to look like galloping horses. Along the walls sat 13 stone chairs, in each a skeleton, upright, still armored, helmets fused to skulls, bridles of gold still in their mouths, some with hoof-shaped breastplates. One had a centaur-like torso fashioned from carved bone. All faced a stone slab at the center of the room. On it, a broken mask, not the one from the shore, older. You approached. Brynja placed a hand on your shoulder. "This was his once," she said. "Your father's. He gave it up when he swore the oath to Edric." You turned to her, startled. "Edric? They made a pact?" Brynja nodded. There was a war between what was and what would be. Edric wanted peace. Your father wanted vengeance. The gods demanded one bloodline to be ended, one child to be spared. She looked at you. You were the coin tossed. You touched the mask. The rune stone on your chest pulsed, though you had not worn it since the dream. In your mind, a scream echoed, not of pain, of fury. Then you saw flashes, a battlefield, antlers soaked in blood, a woman kneeling beside a broken helm, and a newborn held aloft beneath a red sky. When your vision cleared, the skeletons had turned their heads. All 13, facing you. Varg whispered, "The riders choose." You stumbled back. Brynja stepped forward, drew her blade, and cut her palm. She smeared the blood across the mask. A gust of wind tore through the chamber, and from the shadows a voice rumbled, "Sverrin! Awakens!" The walls cracked, the floor groaned. You fled. Back outside, the world had changed. Snow no longer fell. It hung suspended in the air, unmoving. The trees bent as if bowing to some unseen presence, and from behind the barrow a horn sounded, long, deep, not of war, of summoning. Brynja fell to her knees. Varg trembled. You felt nothing, only silence and cold certainty. They had seen you and chosen. The journey from the barrow led you north, through the frostbite fen, a frozen marshland said to feed on warmth. No birds flew, no tracks marked the ice. Varg kept muttering, They see through the water." You asked Brynja what came next. She said only, "We go to the hollow tree. The roots know where the blood runs." 2 days passed in silence. At night, you dreamed again. You stood before a mirror carved of ice. Your reflection wore the antlered crown. It smiled at you, but it had no eyes, just flame. On the 3rd day, you reached the hollow tree. It was no tree. It was a petrified titan, roots like towers, bark like stone. A wound gaped in its trunk, wide enough for a cart to pass through. The old people called it Yarnvida's spine, the first tree of the ironwood, where the wolf-blood witches once met under moonless nights. Yrsa had told you stories of it, but never that it breathed, because it did. The air pulsed like lungs drawing frost. Inside the tree was hollow indeed, but not empty. Roots hung like nooses, fungi glowed blue along the floor. In the center, a pool of black water shimmered with starlight, and before it sat a child, naked, hairless, its skin translucent and eyes pure white. It looked at you, then it spoke in a woman's voice. "Avar." You froze. Brynja drew her blade. "Witchling," she growled. But the child raised its hand, and you felt your legs move without command. You stepped to the pool. Images danced in the water, Skarnharn in flames, Edric chained to the prow of a ship, the masked man raising a sword of lightless metal, Thorol dead in the snow, his heart in a bowl. Then your own face, wearing the mask, seated on a throne of wolves. You turned to the child. "What am I?" it whispered. The last promise and the first punishment. Brynja shouted, "Enough riddles!" The child's skin split like bark, and from it stepped a woman, old, bent, cloaked in moss and bones, the last witch of the Ironwood. She called herself Mora. She told you truths Yrsa dared not speak, that the runestone you bore was not a relic, but a seal, that Sverrin was not a name, but a prison, and that you, Ivar, were the key meant to keep it closed. But the key had awakened, and now what lay beyond it was waking too. Mora gave you a choice. You can run, be hunted, die in the snow like the rest, or you can go to the Well of Ravens and remember what was taken. You asked her, will it save the village? She said, no, then paused. But it may save the world. Before you left, she placed something in your palm, a tooth, carved with the same rune as your runestone. Then she vanished into the roots. You traveled onward, east now toward the Valley of Dead Kings. Behind you, the snow began to fall again. Only this time, it burned when it touched the skin. The wind changed on the fourth day. Where once it came from the fjord, bitter and wet with salt, it now swept from the east, dry and sharp, carrying with it the scent of ash. The snow that fell no longer melted on the skin. It clung like dust, grey and weightless. Even Brynja, hardened and unshakable, walked in silence now. Her eyes scanned the horizon often, hand never far from the hilt of her blade. Varg had grown quieter too. He stopped speaking in riddles and instead hummed under his breath, a song with no melody, low and hollow. You kept walking. The runestone, gone since the dream, had not returned, but the tooth Mora gave you, that you now wore around your neck, and it whispered. The Well of Ravens was no well. It was a pit, a hollow wound torn into the earth atop a black hill barren of snow. No trees grew here, nor grass. Only rock, broken and cracked, as if something had once clawed its way free from beneath. The ravens waited for you. Dozens, hundreds, perched on stones, circling above, filling the sky with their eyes. They did not croak, they did not flap. They simply watched. The air shimmered with old magic, a kind you couldn't name, but felt. It pressed against your chest, made your skin itch. Varg wept when he saw the hill. He did not explain. Brynja placed her hand on your shoulder. You sure about this? She asked. No, you said. But I think I already began long before I woke. She nodded once, then stayed behind. Only you descended into the pit. The slope was steeper than it seemed. Rocks shifted beneath your feet. Bones crunched under your boots. Some were human, some weren't. You reached the bottom after a while. There was no water, no light, only darkness that felt alive. Then you heard a voice, not spoken, remembered. Do you wish to see? You opened your mouth to answer but the air rushed from your lungs. You fell forward, and the world shattered. When you opened your eyes, it was not the pit that surrounded you. It was a field, bright, endless. The sky was red, not from fire, but from sunset. The grass shimmered silver, and there were people, hundreds, all dressed in armor older than any you'd seen. Some bore animal skulls as helms, some had no faces at all. They marched in silence across the field toward a great black gate. Atop the gate stood a boy, a child with your face, but in his eyes, fire. In his hand, a blade of ice. He raised it, and the army knelt. You walked. No one noticed you. The ground felt soft beneath your feet. Not earth, but memories. You saw fragments rise and fall beside you as you moved. A woman with antlers holding a baby. A jarl kneeling before a masked man. A ship burned from the inside out. The village of Skarnhaven, before it was named, being built atop a buried thing, and then your own birth. Only it wasn't birth. It was a bargain. Your mother handed you to someone cloaked in black. The figure placed the runestone on your chest and whispered, "Let him forget until he must remember." You fell to your knees. The vision faded. The well had shown you truth, not prophecy, memory. You had been sealed, bound to silence, hidden in flesh and fire. Your parents were not dead. They had vanished into the shadow between worlds, leaving you behind as the price to keep the masked king asleep. But someone had broken the seal, and now he stirred. You rose slowly. As you did, the ravens began to scream, not cry, scream, a chorus of agony and warning. You climbed back toward the rim, and when you emerged, the world was wrong. The sun was black, the snow was gone, and in the distance, smoke rose from where Skarnhaven once stood. Brynja was waiting, her face pale, her eyes rimmed in frost. "They came," she said. You looked at her. "Who?" She just pointed. You turned and saw a second sun rising from the sea, but it was no sun, it was an eye. You fled west. There was no choice. Skarnhaven had fallen. You saw it from the ridge. Houses burned, longships shattered, the longhouse cracked open like a ribcage. Thorald's men were dead too, their banners scattered in the dirt. No victor, only emptiness, only the eye watching still. You camped that night near the Beltree ruins, an ancient monastery swallowed by roots. The monks had once tried to tame the old gods with bells and carved stones. Now their bones lay where they fell, prayers frozen on their teeth. You asked Brynja again, "What is the masked king?" She answered after a long time. He was the first to wear the crown of bone, the one who stole fire from the gods and buried it in blood. He's not a man, Avar, not anymore. He's a memory that won't die. "And what am I?" you asked. She stared at the fire. "You're his lot, and his heir." That night, Varg vanished. He had left no trace, save for a single rune burned into the tree trunk beside where he had slept. You did not recognize it, but Brynja did. "It's a gate rune," she said. "He's gone ahead." "Where?" "To the place this all ends." You asked, "Where does it end?" Her reply was low, "Where it began." The last words of the night came not from Brynja, nor from memory, but from the tooth around your neck. It whispered as you fell asleep, "He sees you now." And in the distance, at the edge of the world, the masked king began to walk. It took you 6 days to reach the grave of the world. The map was not made of ink, but of scars. Tales Brynja half remembered, runes that twisted when you looked too long, and the whispers of the tooth that pulsed at your chest like a second heart. Westward you walked beyond the lands charted by jarls and warbands, past rivers that sang and mountains that bled iron. The sky hung lower each day, and time ceased to pass as it once had. Here, the land no longer belonged to men. On the 7th morning, you found the path, not a road, a wound, a straight cut through the earth, as if the axe of a god had fallen there long ago. Bones lined the way, arranged deliberately, wolves, horses, men. Each skull turned east, as if watching the place behind you. None faced forward. Brynja crouched at one pile, picked up a talisman shaped like a wolf's jaw. She whispered, "We are close." You didn't ask how she knew. You already felt it. The world itself was holding its breath. The path ended at a valley carved into black stone. It had no name, not on any map, not in any saga, only in dreams. It was shaped like an eye, a perfect oval surrounded by cliffs, and at its center, a circle of 12 standing stones taller than trees, etched with the same runes from your childhood pendant. The stones wept mist. Beneath them, the ground pulsed with red light, as if the earth bled beneath the surface. This was where it began. Brynja said nothing. She knelt and drew her blade. Then she prayed. You had never seen her do that before. Varg was waiting at the edge of the stone ring, alive, barefoot, covered in soot, and smiling. He spoke your name, your true name, and the wind shifted. You stepped into the circle, and the past opened its mouth. The sky dimmed, the air fell silent, and the stones began to glow. Each rune flickered with red and blue flame, and the earth beneath your feet hummed. Not sound, but memory. Then the center of the circle cracked, revealing a pit of blackness spiraling downward. You heard a heartbeat, not yours, older, colder, a rhythm that predated the gods. Varg spoke softly. Here your father gave his soul. Here your mother gave your name. Here Edric made the pact to silence the blood. You turned sharply. Edric came here? Varg nodded. He came to bury a god. Brynja looked at you then. And he used you to do it. You descended the spiral path. Brynja followed. Varg did not. His task was done. He knelt beside the ring and began to hum. As you stepped downward, the spiral walls shimmered. Not with moss or light, but images, echoes burned into stone, a man in iron robes sealing a crown in a box of flame, a woman tearing her own eyes out before the altar, a child carried in a wolfskin cloak across a river of blood, a sword that sang when it struck. And then you, buried alive but smiling. At the bottom there was no chamber, only a mirror, black, smooth, unbroken. It showed you nothing at first. Then a figure appeared, your own face, but older, worn, the eyes like ice, the mouth thin. He wore the crown of antlers, the bone mask, the reflection spoke. You came late, you replied. I came when I remembered. The reflection smiled. Then you know what must be done. You didn't answer. He nodded anyway, and reached toward the surface. So did you. Your fingers met, and the mirror shattered. You woke not in the pit, but on a battlefield. It stretched for miles, flags tattered, corpses unmoving. The air stank of copper and frost. The sun was a smear of red light, neither rising nor setting. You stood alone, no Brynja, no Varg, only you, and across the field, a throne, made of wolves' bones and broken swords, and on it the masked king. He stood as you approached, 7 feet tall, iron robes, a crown of blackened antlers. In his hand, your pendant, and in the other, a blade. He did not attack. He waited. You felt your own hand close around something. A second blade, not forged, remembered. You lifted it. The two of you circled, and then the fight began. The duel was not fair. He struck like lightning, moved like wind. His blade cut air itself. Your arm bled before you could even parry. The mask never shifted, but you felt hatred behind it, ancient and vast. You dodged, you fought, you bled, but you did not yield, because the ground beneath your feet remembered you, and you remembered it. The tide turned, you struck, a deep gash in his side. The masked king staggered. He looked down, then at you, and laughed, not in joy, but in relief. He dropped the sword, fell to one knee and reached up, removed the mask. Beneath it was you, older, dying. He whispered, "Now you know," and crumbled into ash. You stood there for a long time. Then from the horizon figures appeared, marching. Some wore antlers, some had flame for eyes, some were beasts in man shape. All bowed and vanished. The throne remained empty. The mask lay at your feet. You did not pick it up. Not yet. When you awoke again, for it had surely been a dream or something worse, you were back at the Ring of Stones. Brynja knelt beside you. She said nothing. Varg was gone. Only the tooth remained, now split in half. And the pendant had returned. You placed it around your neck, and the land breathed again. The throne stood in silence. For 3 days, you didn't speak. You camped in the circle of stones where the masked king had vanished, where the ground still pulsed with distant memory. Brynja watched over you, building fires that didn't warm and preparing food you didn't eat. She said little. She understood. Some wounds are not of flesh. You had killed no enemy. You had claimed no victory. You had stared into the face of yourself and watched it turn to ash. The tooth lay broken in your hand. The rune stone around your neck no longer burned. And still, the earth waited, as if it knew the throne had not yet been claimed. On the 4th day, the birds returned, not ravens.
Not vultures, songbirds, dozens of them, singing. Brynja looked up, stunned. They never come this far west. You listened. It was not a melody, it was a call, a summoning. The trees rustled in the valley, not with wind, but movement. Something stirred in the north. Brynja turned to you. They know, the old things. The death of the masked king was no end. You already knew it. He had not died. He had passed the burden to you. You made the decision at dawn. You would not run. You would return.
To Skarnhavn, or what was left of it. To Edric, to the ashes, to the people who had raised you and betrayed you in equal measure. Not to claim vengeance, but to claim truth, and to stand in the place your ancestors fled. The throne had waited long enough. The journey back was not the same. The road was shorter, though you walked longer. The trees bowed as you passed. Wolves followed at a distance, but did not attack. The wind whispered your name at night. Not Avar, but Sverrin. The name no longer frightened you. It fit now, like a cloak returned. Brynja noticed the change. She said nothing. But at night, she began to sleep with her axe, farther from reach. Even she was unsure of you now. On the 6th night, you reached the fjord again. But Skarnhavn was not as you left it. The village was half buried in snow, half swallowed by ash. No lights burned, no sounds rose, but smoke curled from the longhouse chimney, too straight, too steady for mere wind. Someone remained. You approached at dawn. The pier had collapsed into the sea, longboats splintered. The black ship, the one of the dead, had vanished. Brynja moved silently beside you, her breath tight. She whispered, "They should be gone." You nodded. "They aren't." The village square was empty, but the longhouse doors were open. Firelight flickered inside. You stepped forward and stopped. At the threshold lay a line of ash, deliberate, ritualistic, and nailed to the doorframe. Edric's axe. You pulled it free. The blade was dull, the wood charred, but the symbol carved in the handle remained untouched. A single eye, weeping. Inside the longhouse you found them. 3 elders, 10 warriors, all dead, seated in place, unmoving, eyes open, no wounds, no blood, just stillness. At the head of the hall sat Edric, alive, barely. He looked older than you remembered. His hair was white now, his remaining eye dull, his arm twisted behind him with ropes and old runes. He smiled faintly when he saw you. "Sverrin!" he rasped. You knelt beside him. He coughed, blood dark on his beard. "I hoped you wouldn't come back." "Why?" He looked past you. "To keep the mask unclaimed. As long as no one wore it, the world might forget." You held his hand. He whispered, "But the world never forgets." He told you the truth as he bled, that he had once marched beneath the masked king, not as foe, but as brother. That long ago, when the gods first tried to unmake the deep blood line, Edric had been the one to hide the last of them. Your father. Edric had watched him burn the world, then watched him die, then took you and sealed the curse, not to protect the world, but to give it time. "I failed," he said. He woke anyway, he always does. You asked him what you should do. He smiled. Choose. And died. You stood in the longhouse, alone. Brynja waited outside. You took Edric's axe and placed it on the hearth, then walked to the altar. There, waiting in a bowl of iron, was the mask. Whole again. You reached for it, paused, then took it. The moment your fingers touched it, the world twisted. You stood again in the circle of stones, but not as before. Now the sky pulsed with fire, the earth shook. From all directions, wolves. From the sea, mist. And above, circling, the ravens. They called a name, not Ivar, not Sverrin, king. Brynja stepped forward. She had drawn her blade. "You know what happens if you wear it," she said. You nodded. "The world burns." You looked at her. "And if I don't?" She lowered the blade. "The world ends." The throne rose from the earth, built of bone, steel, and ash. You walked to it, the mask in your hands. Each step made the wind scream louder. The gods, the dead, the beasts, all watched. You sat. The mask glowed, and you placed it upon your face. There was no pain, no madness, only silence. And then, understanding. You remembered everything. All lives, all oaths, all betrayals, all deaths, and all the thrones that waited for kings who never came. You stood again, not alone, but part of the world. Not master, but memory. Not ruler, but reckoner. The old world had returned, and you were its voice. They came from the east at dawn, not ships, not warriors, but the dead. They walked in silence over the sea, their feet not touching water, their eyes hollow and white. Men, women, children, some in armor, some barefoot. Some bore wounds that still bled though their hearts no longer beat. Others carried nothing but memories in their silence. They did not speak, they did not breathe, they came for you. You stood on the cliff above Skarnhavn, the mask now resting upon your brow, the weight of it both ancient and right. The crown of antlers cast no shadow, the rune stone against your chest no longer burned. It had merged with the bone, become one with you. Brynja stood beside you, her hand on her axe, though she had long since stopped looking at you as a friend. Now she watched you like one watches a storm on the horizon. Something that cannot be stopped, only endured. "Is this it?" she asked. "The end?" "No," you said. "The reckoning." You descended the slope in silence. At your back came the wind, low and cold. Ahead, the dead gathered at the shoreline, but they did not attack. They waited. In their center stood a woman with flame-red hair and frost clinging to her brow. Your mother, or what remained of her? Beside her, a man of steel and fire, your father, the last masked king before you. They bowed, as did the rest. Brynja gasped. You stepped onto the frozen water. It did not crack. From the sky, a raven descended. It landed on your shoulder, spoke with the voice of the god Odin, though cracked and weak. It was not meant to be you. You looked into its eye. "No," you said, but the others failed. The raven cawed once, bitter, resigned. "Then bind them." You raised your hand, and the dead knelt. You did not bring vengeance. You brought judgment. For 7 days you walked the coast, and the dead followed. You passed through villages forgotten by the Jarls, places where old crimes lingered like rot. In each you spoke a name, sometimes of the guilty, sometimes of the innocent, always with clarity. And the dead claimed what was owed, not in violence, in silence. The world began to remember and to fear. Stories spread of a man wearing bone whose eyes held a light that showed the truth behind lies. Of a king who never sat. Of a ghost who did not die. Some called you a savior, others a devil, but none spoke your name. It had been swallowed by the world. Now they only whispered. He walks. On the 10th day you reached Winterheim. The gates were sealed. but you did not knock. With one gesture, they opened. Thorold was waiting. He stood in the great hall, surrounded by his warriors, all trembling but holding fast. He stepped forward. "Are you come to destroy me?" he asked. "No," you said. "Only to ask." He frowned. "Ask what? Why?" He fell to his knees. "I was afraid," he said, "of the blood, of the stories, of what you would become. So I struck first." You nodded. "Thank you for your honesty," and turned away. No fire consumed him, no blade fell. The dead did not touch him, and that was worse. You left the hall in silence. But Brynja lingered. You heard her voice behind you, low, cold. "You killed my brother," she said. Thorold looked up, tearful. "I was trying to protect." Her axe struck once, no more words. She joined you outside and said nothing. The reckoning continued. You crossed the Midbar Mountains, passed through Frostfields where the sun had not risen in 100 years. Everywhere you went, the old things rose to meet you. The giant who wept frozen tears beneath the stone bridge, the Drakkar queen who slept beneath Lake Bjorna, the fire serpent coiled around the roots of Jarnvida's spine. All of them knelt because they remembered. You were not a man, you were memory given voice, and the voice had returned. But not all welcomed you. In the south, the Jarls of the Salt Coasts gathered an army. They declared you heretic, abomination, monster. You did not answer. You simply walked, and they broke, some by blade, most by truth, because when you looked into their eyes, they saw themselves. And it was too much. Brynja changed too. The farther you went, the less she spoke. She grew harder, colder. Once she slept, then she stopped. Once she laughed, now she didn't. She had not followed a king. She had followed a boy from Skarnhaven, but that boy was gone. One night, as the moons rose twin and full, she finally spoke again. "You'll have to let go," she said. "Of what? Of being a man, of being Ivar, or you'll break." You looked at her. "I already did." She stared at the stars. "So did I." The next morning, the tooth reappeared, whole again, but in her hands. It burned her fingers. She didn't flinch. "I think this was never meant for you," she said. You nodded. "Then what will you do?" She smiled, bitter and proud. "Hold the gate," and vanished into the pines. You did not see her again. Now you were truly alone. Except for the dead. You returned at last to the throne, not to sit, to bury it. With your hands you tore it down, bone by bone, ash by ash. The earth swallowed it, and the crown you wore dissolved into dust. The mask cracked and fell away, and the voice inside you, the endless whisper of kings past, of bloodlines doomed, faded. You stood again, not Sverrin, not Avar, just a man. The dead looked at you one last time, then turned and walked into the sea, one by one, without sound, without end, until you were alone. And for the first time in your life, you slept and dreamed of peace. You woke beneath the boughs of an old pine, snow falling gently through the needles. No fire, no sound. Just the hush of winter and the scent of bark and wind. The sky was pale blue, not dark, not blood-streaked, not cracked with flame. For the first time in what felt like moons, the world was quiet. The dead had returned to their silence. The crown was gone, the mask broken, the throne buried. You were alone and free. You rose slowly, body aching from sleep, long denied. The ground where you lay was soft, warm even, as if the earth itself had sheltered you. Around you the trees swayed, the birds sang again, not warning songs, just life. It was unfamiliar. You walked, not with purpose, just walked. The path was unfamiliar, though the trees felt old, somewhere west of the coast, east of the barrows, north of the old roads. You no longer carried blade or pendant. You had no destination, but the wind knew your name. Not Avar, not Sverrin, but something simpler. Something clean. At dusk you came upon a cottage, a small thing. Stone walls, thatched roof, a chimney, coughing gentle smoke. A goat dozed near the door, a raven perched atop the fence. You approached. The door opened before you knocked, and Yrsa stood there, alive, older, eyes dimmer, but smiling. She said only 3 words. "I told you," then stepped aside. Inside, the hearth crackled. The smell of stew filled the air. You sat, you ate, you didn't speak, not until the stars rose. Then she handed you a bundle wrapped in old cloth. Inside, the tooth, now carved anew, with a single rune glowing faint blue. Next to it, your father's ring, still bearing the mark of fire and ash. You looked at her. She met your gaze. "It is over," she said, but not ended. You stayed there 3 days. In the mornings, you chopped wood. In the afternoons, you walked the woods in silence. At night, Yrsa told stories, not sagas, not songs of war, just memories of Skarnhaven before the raiders, of Brynja as a child chasing goats, of Halrik, your foster father, who had once tried to make a sword sing. You listened and remembered, and slowly your heartbeat became your own again. On the 4th morning, a rider came, not armored, not a god, just a boy, no older than 15. He carried a letter, sealed in blue wax, from the High Council of Alstara, far to the south. They had heard the stories of the man who broke the throne, of the death of the old kings, of the reckoning that walked the frost. They asked you to come, not to rule, but to speak. You burned the letter that night. Yrsa said nothing. You watched the flames curl and vanish. You did not belong in councils. You belonged to the trees, to the wind, to the silence between what was and what might yet be. But peace does not last. It never has. On the 7th night, as the moon hung half-born, you felt it. A shift in the earth, the way frost forms beneath skin. A knowing. Something stirs, not from the past, from beyond. Yrsa brought you the mask's remains. You buried them, then asked her, was it all for nothing? She shook her head. No, it was for choice. That night, you sat alone. And from the ashes of the fire, a shape emerged. Not solid, not shadow, but memory, the shape of Brynja. She looked the same. Axe on her back, hair braided, eyes fierce. You stood. I thought you were gone, you said. I am. Then what is this? A reminder. You stepped closer. Of what? Her voice was soft. That even kings bleed. You reached for her. She vanished. Only ashes remained, and the scent of pine. You rose the next morning and packed no belongings. You took no blade, only the tooth, now dim, and the ring. You left the cottage. Yrsa did not stop you. She simply said, be who they never let you be, and closed the door. You walked again, through pines, over rivers, past graves that no longer whispered, and everywhere the land remembered your passing, not with fear, with quiet. In one village, a child left a sprig of ash at the foot of a shrine. In another, an elder carved the old antlers into the side of a barn, not as threat, but blessing. In the north, a wolf ran beside you for 3 days, then disappeared. No gods appeared. No armies followed, just the road and the soft call of wind. You passed through Skarnhaven one last time. Nothing remained but stones. You stood at the cliff where you first saw the ship of the dead, and from the sea you saw only waves, no eyes, no dead, no kings. You bowed, not to the past, to the stillness, and walked on. The final night came quietly. You slept beneath an oak that bloomed too early. The stars above were unfamiliar. And in your dream, the voice returned, the one from the mirror. Only this time, it was not your voice. It was hers, your mother, She said only this: be more than what they feared. You woke with tears in your eyes, you wiped them away, and walked toward the mountains, not to fight, not to rule, but to build something new, something no saga would sing, because the throne had waited, and you had walked away. The winter broke slowly, not with thunder, not with sunlight, but with silence. The frost held the earth like a mother reluctant to release her child. Trees stood barren, their limbs black against the pale sky. The rivers still wore their armor of ice. But the wind had changed. It no longer whispered your name. Not Ivar, not Sverrin, not king, just the sound of wind, and that was enough. You made your way into the mountain valleys, south and west, where the land rose and narrowed, where few dared go, not because of monsters, but because of solitude. You passed no one. You hunted. You slept by cold fires. You spoke aloud only when the silence grew too loud, and the land listened. It remembered you still, but it did not kneel. You were not its ruler now, only its guest. On the 27th night, as the moon cracked like a shard of bone, you found it. A cave, shallow, unassuming, hidden behind thorns and an outcropping of old stone. Moss clung to its mouth, no footprints, no markings, just a feeling. You stepped inside and felt peace. Not the false quiet of fear, but true stillness. You decided to stay. You built a fire, for the first time in many months, not from need, but from desire. The flames danced, you sat, and let the silence wrap around you like a worn cloak. The ring your father had worn rested on your finger now. The tooth, carved and dim, lay beside you. You no longer dreamed of thrones, of masks, of armies, but of water and green, and a field untouched by war. Spring, they said, never came to the north. But something deeper than seasons was shifting now. The deep roots of the world stirred, not in anger, in hope. On the fourth morning in the cave, you found a visitor. She was no child, no spirit, no soldier, just a woman. Wrapped in grey wool, hair streaked with snow, her eyes brown and bright. She carried no weapon, just a pack of bread and salted meat. She said, "You don't look like a god." You said, "I'm not." She smiled. "Good, we've had enough of those." Her name was Leva. She was from a village farther down the slope, not marked on any map, just 10 homes and a goat trail. They'd heard stories, she said, of a man who wore a mask of bone, who walked with the dead, who burned thrones and buried kings. But they didn't believe stories, they believed weather, and the snows had stopped early this year. "You did that?" she asked. You shook your head. She nodded anyway. "And stayed the night. You did not touch. You did not ask." She slept by the fire and did not dream. In the morning, she was gone. But she returned the next night, and the one after. Over time, she told you her stories, not of battle or blood, but of life, of growing up in a house with 5 brothers and no roof, of learning to trap rabbits by watching owls, of burying her father beside a stone with no name, of naming storms and singing to trees. You listened. You told her almost nothing, but somehow she understood more than most who had heard everything. Weeks passed, the cave changed. You built a bench from stone, hung herbs from the ceiling, carved a bowl from birchwood. You forgot what day it was, and didn't care. Then one night, the birds returned. Their song was not like before. It was richer, warmer, alive. And in the firelight, Leva said, "Something's growing again." You looked at your hands, no longer cracked with frost, no longer clenched, open, still scarred, but not bleeding. In late spring, she took you to her village. They didn't bow, they didn't ask questions. They simply shared bread and asked you to help fix a roof. So you did. You learned the names of goats, you helped birth a calf. You laughed when an old man tried to arm wrestle you and nearly won. They never asked about the throne, or the crown, or the dead, only your favorite color, and whether you liked honey in your tea. You stayed, not hidden, not in exile, but in peace. People came through sometimes, traders, lost wanderers. Some carried tales of distant wars or kings arguing in far cities, of a church in Alstara that now bore your image in stained glass. You smiled and said nothing. One night in the meadow above the village, Leva took your hand. You asked her why. She said, "Because I can." You didn't let go. The next morning, she asked the only question that made you pause. Do you ever miss it? You didn't need to ask what she meant. You looked toward the north, where the sea roared beyond the mountains, where Skarnhaven once lay, where the mask had fallen. You thought of Brynja, of Varg, of Edric, of all those who had bled to give you choice, and you said no, then paused. But I remember. She nodded. Good, that's enough. Summer came, for the first time in years. Real summer. The rivers ran clean, the crops grew high, no storms broke the sky, and no dead walked the roads. The children of the village began carving antlers into their toys, not in fear, not in worship, but because they said it brought luck. You never corrected them. You took the tooth one day and carved it again, not into a blade, but into a flute. You played it only once. And the wind carried the sound far, very far. That night you dreamed of wolves sleeping in sunlight, of thrones turned to gardens, of a crown lying forgotten in soil, and you woke smiling, because spring had come, and you had not burned the world. You had walked away from the fire and let it die. They still told stories of you, even as you grew older, even as your hair silvered and your hands stiffened with the years, even as the village grew from 10 homes to 40, even as new children were born who had never seen war, never heard the mask whisper in the wind, never known a world ruled by bloodlines and curses. Still they told stories, but the stories no longer belonged to you. They belonged to the world. You heard them sometimes, sitting by the fire outside your home. They spoke in hushed tones, wide-eyed, their voices high with wonder. They said you were a god once, that your sword bled truth, that your eyes burned with the weight of death, that your voice could summon the fallen and banish kings, and that one day you vanished into mist, only to return when the world needed judgment again. You smiled when they said that, because it was all wrong. And yet, not. The truth was simpler. You were just a man. A boy who woke one morning in a village called Skarnhav, who did not ask to wear a crown, who was given a name that did not belong to him, and made it his anyway. A man who chose not to rule, and in that choice ruled more than any king ever did. Leva knew the truth. She told no one. Not even the children you raised, not even the ones who asked why your eyes sometimes looked past the trees, or why wolves never came near your home. She only said, "Your father walked far, that's all." And they accepted it, because children, more than kings, know when something is sacred. Seasons passed. You buried Yrsa beneath the pine where she once found you. The roots curled around her as if welcoming her home. You scattered Brynja's axe into the sea, letting the waves carry her strength to those who would never know her name. You carved Varg's rune into the stone above the hearth, a gate always open, and you let them rest, truly rest. Sometimes you heard the whisper of the gods, not voices, but wind through branches, the hush of snowfall. The moment before dawn when the world forgets to breathe. They had not forgotten you, but they no longer feared you, because you had given them what no other bearer of the mask had, peace. In your final years, you taught others to forge, not weapons, but tools. You showed them how to shape iron with patience, not wrath, how to listen to the metal, how to let the fire teach, not consume. You never spoke of the day the forge sang. That was your memory, your secret, your prayer. When you felt the end coming, it wasn't dramatic. There was no storm, no ravens circling, no crown returning, just quiet and calm. You sat by the fire, your breath slow, Liva beside you. Older now, her hair white, her hands still warm. She took yours and said nothing, because she never needed to. You looked to the horizon, to the place where mountains bowed to the sea, where a village once burned, and whispered, "I remember," then closed your eyes and let go. They buried you beneath the hill where the frost first broke, where the birds first sang after the silence, not in stone, not in a tomb, but beneath wildflowers and wind. No statue, no saga, only a marker. He remembered. So we remain. Generations passed. The world changed, the gods faded, but the land remained, and so did your story. Not as a king, not as a god, but as a man, who was given power and chose not to use it. And in the north, when the snow falls late and the birds sing too early, they say he walks again, not with an army, not with fire, but with silence, and a crown made only of memory, because not every king must rule, and not every throne must be filled. You were the king who never was, and the world, for once, was better for it.